Welcome, night owls. Welcome back to Midnight FM, where shadows find their voice and silence is never empty. Tonight, we return with a guest whose stories seem to echo from the very heart of darkness itself. Grandpa Joseph is here, once again bringing us a tale not of forests or lantern lights this time, but of four walls and a roof that never truly let go of what they once held. There are houses that are simply abandoned, and then there are houses that remain alive even when no one lives there. Tonight's story is about one of those places, the old farmhouse on Willow Creek Road in Pennsylvania. Listeners, lock your doors, dim your lights, and lean closer, because once you step inside this house, it won't let you leave the same. Grandpa Joseph, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, listeners. This memory takes me back to the fall of 1965. I was 18 years old, just out of high school, restless and looking for trouble in the way only young men do. My cousin David had moved to Pennsylvania that summer, and I went to visit him. The town he lived in was small, just a stretch of stores, a church, and fields running off in every direction. But the people there whispered about one place more than any other, the farmhouse on Willow Creek Road. It sat at the edge of town, leaning against a patch of woods, its white paint peeled away, windows broken, and roof sagging like the back of an old horse. The story went that a widow had lived there alone after her husband passed in a mining accident. One night, neighbors heard her screaming. When they ran to check, the house was empty. Nobody, no sign of struggle, just the echoes of her voice in the halls. Since then, no one stayed there longer than a night. They said the walls whispered, the floorboards groaned with footsteps that weren't your own, and sometimes you could hear her crying in the upstairs bedroom. David was a year older than me, bold to a fault. And the first night I arrived, he said, "Joe, we're going to the farmhouse." I laughed it off. But the truth is, I had always had a weakness for testing old ghost stories. So a few nights later, with the October moon hanging thin in the sky, David and I grabbed flashlights and made our way down Willow Creek Road. The dirt crunched under our boots. The field stretched out quiet on either side, and there it was, rising out of the fog like something that had been waiting for us all along. The porch sagged as we stepped onto it. The front door was still there, though half rotten, its hinges groaning when David shoved it open. The smell that hit me was something I'll never forget. Damp wood, mildew, and underneath it, something sour, like meat left too long in the sun. We clicked on our flashlights, beams cutting through the dust and cobwebs. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, patterned with faded roses that looked black in the dark. The living room still had a couch, torn open by mice, springs jutting out like broken bones. The fireplace was cold, but the ashes inside looked fresh, as if someone had used it not long ago.
We moved carefully through the rooms,
Every step on the floorboards echoed like we weren't alone. And every so often, I thought I heard something above us. A creak, a shuffle. David whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded, but we kept going. The kitchen was worse. The cupboards hung open, shelves bare, but there were jars on the counter, their labels faded. I picked one up. Inside was something black and shriveled, floating in cloudy water. I dropped it fast, the glass shattering across the floor. David laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but the house didn't just feel abandoned. It felt awake. We decided to check upstairs. The staircase groaned under our weight, every step threatening to give way. At the top was a long hallway, doors on each side, all slightly open. The air was colder there, like stepping into a cellar. I could see my breath fogging in the flashlight beam. The first room we checked was empty. Just an old bed frame and a cracked dresser. But in the second room, there was something that made both of us freeze. The bed was neatly mated, a quilt tucked in tight, and on the pillow was the impression of a head, like someone had just been lying there. David whispered, "He still sleeps here." And for the first time that night, I felt real fear. The kind that curls in your stomach and makes your hands sweat. I wanted to leave, but David insisted we keep going. At the end of the hall was the master bedroom, and that's where we heard it. A sound that stopped us cold. It was faint at first, like wind through the trees, but then it grew clearer. A woman's voice, soft, broken, crying, coming from behind that door. I looked at David. He looked at me. Neither of us wanted to open it, but something. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe both, pushed us forward. David reached for the knob. It was ice cold under his hand, and when he turned it, the crying stopped. The upstairs hallway stretched before us like the spine of a dead animal. Long, crooked, each door hanging open just enough to tempt you inside. Our footsteps echoed, soft but too loud in that silence. The air was heavy, damp, carrying a smell like old rain-soaked wood and something faintly metallic. I felt Samuel's hand, no, David's hand this time, brush against mine, trembling, though he would never admit it. We checked the first room on the left, empty. Just dust, an iron bed frame, and scraps of wallpaper peeling down like scabs. The windows cracked and the night fog curled through it like smoke. I told David we should leave, but he shook his head. "We've come this far," he whispered. "Let's see it through." The second room was worse. There was furniture here, though half-rotten. A dresser leaned against the wall, its mirror cracked, but still reflecting slivers of our flashlight beams. When we stepped inside, both of us froze, because for a moment, in that fractured mirror, I didn't just see us, I saw someone standing behind us. A woman. Hair long and stringy, eyes pale and sunken. Her face was twisted, mouth moving like she was crying, though no sound came out. I spun around with the flashlight. No one there. When I looked back, the mirror was empty. David laughed, but it was shaky. "Old glass plays tricks on you," he muttered. But I knew what I saw, and I knew the stories about this house weren't just stories. The third room had been a child's once. Faded wallpaper with cartoon animals, now keeling in strips. A small wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, cracked and splintered, but upright. As our lights passed over it, it creaked. Once, twice. Slowly, it began to rock. There was no wind. David whispered, "Keep moving," and I didn't argue. We reached the fourth room. That's where we found the bed. The quilt was neat, tucked in tightly, as if someone had just smoothed it. And on the pillow, a hollow, the shape of a head. A person lying there not long before we entered. David stared at it, his voice low. "She still sleeps here." I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to get out of that house. But something else, maybe curiosity, maybe even the house itself, pushed us forward. At the end of the hallway stood the master bedroom door. It was larger, heavier, darker than the others. The wood was stained, warped with age, but I swear I saw marks on it. Scratches, as if fingernails had clawed it from the inside. That's when we heard it, a sound that stopped us cold. Crying, soft first, muffled, as if drifting through walls. But as we stood there, it grew clearer. A woman's sobs, raw, broken, echoing behind that door. It rose and fell like a tide, the kind of crying that doesn't ask for help, just pours out endless grief. I looked at David. He looked at me. Neither of us wanted to open it, but something, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, forced him forward. He reached for the knob. I remember the way his hand shook, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the walls. The metal was so cold it frosted under his grip. And when he turned it, the crying stopped. The silence was worse than the sobbing, thick, empty, waiting. David pushed the door open. The beam of our lights swept inside. The master bedroom was bigger, but emptier than the rest. The wallpaper was stripped, the floorboards warped, and in the center of the room stood a tall wardrobe. Its doors hung half open, like a mouth frozen mid-sentence. Against the far wall, over the bed frame, were words scratched deep into the plaster. Jagged, desperate. "Don't let him in."
My stomach turned to ice. "Who wrote that?" I whispered. David didn't answer. His light had landed on something else. At first, I thought it was a pile of rags slumped in the corner. But then, the rags moved. It was a figure. A woman seated on the floor, back against the wall. Her dress was old, lace frayed and yellow with age. Long gray hair fell forward, covering her face. And as our light touched her, the crying began again, low, broken, a sound that filled the room like water pouring in. David whispered, "Ma'am, are you all right?" The figure didn't answer. It just swayed, the sound rising, falling, like she was caught in endless mourning. I wanted to drag him out, but he stepped closer, hand trembling. He reached for her shoulder. "David, don't," I hissed, but he didn't listen. His hand touched fabric, and in that instant the room changed. The figure's head snapped up, the hair fell back, and where her face should have been, there was nothing. A hollowed void, black and endless, with two burning embers deep inside where I should be. The mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and the crying turned into a scream that shook the walls. The wardrobe slammed shut. The bed rattled violently. The springs clanging as something massive beneath the house was forcing its way up. David stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching glimpses of her arms, long, thin, stretching unnaturally as they raked for him. I grabbed his shirt, yanking him toward the door. It had swung shut, but I slammed into it with my shoulder until it burst open. We stumbled into the hallway, gasping, half blind. Behind us, the scream still echoed, but when I dared one look back, the room was empty. Dust, silence, no woman, no writing, just emptiness. David's face was pale, his chest heaving. "What the hell was that?" he gasped. I had no answer. Only one thought pounded in my skull. We had to get out. We rushed down the staircase. Each step cracked beneath us like it would splinter and swallow us whole. But when we reached the front door, we froze. The front door was shut, tight, and no matter how David twisted the knob, shoved, or kicked, it didn't move. It was as if a house itself had decided we weren't leaving. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, dragging, moving across the floorboards above us, one room to the next, back and forth. I whispered, "She's still here." David's hand shook against the flashlight, but before we could decide where to run, another sound joined it, a low creak from the kitchen. We weren't alone, not upstairs, not downstairs. The whole house was alive, breathing around us, and then a woman's voice, clear, sharp, whispering from just beyond the kitchen door. "Don't let him in." The whisper slid under the kitchen door like smoke. "Don't let him in." The voice was female, soft but sharp, like a knife dipped in honey. David and I froze. We stood in the entryway, caught between the footsteps above and the whispering behind the kitchen door. I felt trapped, like a rat in a maze that only the house understood. David muttered, "We're getting Octo. Door or no door, we're leaving." He raised his boot and kicked the front door again. The wood didn't splinter. It didn't even shudder. It was like kicking stone. Then the footsteps upstairs stopped. Silence fell over the house, heavy and crushing. The only sound was our ragged breathing. And then the kitchen door creaked open, slowly, as if something wanted us to see it.
Our flashlights trembled as we pointed them toward the dark opening. The kitchen looked the same as before, rotted cupboards, broken jars. But in the middle of the room stood a chair. It hadn't been there before, and on it sat a shadow. A human shape, blacker than the dark around it, edges flickering like smoke. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just sat there, waiting. The whisper came again, not from the chair, but from everywhere at once. "Don't let him in." David's voice cracked. "Who's him?" No answer, just the slow creak of the rocking horse upstairs. Back and forth, back and forth. Suddenly, the shadow in the chair leaned forward, just enough to let us know it had noticed us. My stomach turned. The air grew heavy, thick like water, and my flashlight flickered. David cursed, grabbing my arm. "We have to move now." We bolted down the hall, away from the kitchen. I don't know why. There was no plan, no exit, but instinct pushed us toward the back of the house. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, each step sinking into the warped floor, and all the while something followed. Not footsteps, not breathing, but a pressure like the house itself was walking with us. We reached the back door, half rotted, covered in mold. David yanked at the handle, locked it. He slammed his shoulder against it, but it didn't give. I turned, light shaking in my hand. The hallway behind us was shifting. I swear to you, it was bending. The walls bowed inward, the ceiling stretched higher, as if the house was alive, reshaping itself to trap us. And through it all, that whisper came again, closer, clearer.
"Don't let him in." "Who?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The silence that followed was worse. David stopped pounding the door. He was staring at the floor. I followed his gaze. The boards were swelling, bulging upward as if something was crawling beneath them. Then came a sound I'll never forget. Knocking from under the floor. Slow, heavy. Boom, boom, boom. The board split open, splinters flying. A hand pushed through, long fingers, gray and twisted, nails like rusted hooks. It gripped the floor, pulling against it as another hand emerged. Then an arm. Then a shoulder. Something was dragging itself out from under the house. The air went ice cold. The smell of rot and earth poured up through the cracks, and then I understood. The voice hadn't been warning us about the woman. It hadn't been warning us about shadows or mirrors. It had been warning us about him, the thing beneath the house. David screamed, kicking at the arm. The nails tore into his boot, ripping leather. He fell back, and I grabbed him, pulling him away as the floor collapsed further. A head rose from the darkness, if you can call it that. It was wrong, too long, too narrow, the skin stretched tight over bone. Its mouth opened, unhinged, a black pit lined with broken teeth. And the sound that poured out wasn't a growl. It wasn't a scream. It was a chorus. Dozens of voices crying, whispering, begging, all at once. The voices of everyone it had taken. I yanked David toward the stairs, but they weren't stairs anymore. They twisted upward like a spine, each step crooked, endless. The walls pulsed, the plaster breathing in and out. We were inside something living.
something that had been waiting for us. The shadow from the kitchen appeared at the base of the twisted staircase. Only now it wasn't a shadow. It had a face. The widow's face, eyes hollow, lips split as she mouthed the words again, "Don't let him in." But it was too late. The thing from under the house dragged itself higher. Its body cracked as it moved, joints bending the wrong way, limbs too long. It reached the hall, filling it, blocking the door behind. David pulled at me, sobbing, "Joe, what do we do?" I didn't know. My mind was blank with terror. But then something changed. The widow's figure raised her arm, pointing to the wardrobe upstairs, the one in the master bedroom, the one that had slammed shut. I understood. We weren't meant to run. We were meant to lock him back in. I pulled David up the warped staircase, each step buckling under us. The voices screamed louder, the house shaking. Behind us, the thing clawed up the walls, dragging itself closer. The widow's cries guided us, echoing through the hall. We burst into the master bedroom. The wardrobe stood open now, wide as a gaping mouth. Inside, only darkness.
I shoved David toward the wardrobe, and he stumbled inside, flashlight beam cutting across the black interior. I followed, and the door slammed shut behind us with a force that rattled the whole house. Darkness swallowed us. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, only the sound of David's ragged breathing beside me. Then came the pounding. The thing had reached the master bedroom. It hammered against the wardrobe doors, the wood bowing with every strike. The voices screamed louder, echoing inside the closet, circling us. Eddie's voice, Samuel's voice, even Mark's cracked whisper muttering that same chant. They weren't gone. They were in here. David shouted, "We can't stay in here!" He shoved at the doors, but they didn't move. I grabbed him, forcing him still. "No, this is what you want. Don't let him in." The words tasted bitter, but they felt true. The widow's warning, the scratches on the wall, the whispers that had followed us. They weren't trying to harm us. They were trying to keep that thing out. The pounding grew frantic, the wood cracking, splinters raining down. Through the gaps, I saw it. Those long arms, those broken teeth, that endless black mouth. It was forcing its way inside. If it got in, it wouldn't just take us. It would take everything. I dropped to my knees and whispered the only thing I could. "Stay shut! Stay shut! Don't let him in!" The voices joined me. First, the widow, then Eddie, then Samuel, a chorus of the lost. "Don't let him in! Don't let him in!" The chant filled the wardrobe, vibrating through the walls. The door shook violently, just screaming, and then it stopped. Silence. The pounding ceased. The air grew still, heavy, like the moment after a storm. David clutched my arm, his nails digging into my skin. "Is it gone?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep in the dark, I still felt it, waiting, hungry, caged, but not defeated. When we finally dared to push the doors open, the room was empty. No creature, no widow, just dust and cold moonlight pouring through the broken window. The writing on the wall was gone true, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew what we'd barely survived. We fled the house without looking back. This time, the front door swung open easily, like it had never been locked at all. The night air hit me sharp and clean, and I breathed it in like I'd been drowning. David never spoke of it again, not once. And I didn't either, until now, because some things once spoken wake up again. And I fear that house is still waiting, still breathing, still whispering, "Don't let him in."
You've been listening to Midnight FM, and that was Grandpa Joseph with The House on Willow Creek Road. A farmhouse that wasn't empty, but live. A house that warned, that whispered, that begged to keep something out. And the question that lingers is simple. What happens when one day the doors don't hold? I wonder how many of you listening tonight live near an abandoned home. A place kids dare each other to enter. A place neighbors whisper about when the lights flicker. What if those houses aren't haunted by the dead, but by something desperate to get in? We thank Grandpa Joseph for sharing his memory and for carrying the burden of what most of us could never face. And to you, night owls, thank you for staying awake with us through another hour of shadows. Remember, some doors aren't meant to be opened, and some warnings aren't meant to be ignored. This is Jacob, signing off from Midnight FM. Sleep, if you can.